Welcome to Titan Wargaming. Today we're going to be working on the Legion of Everblight battlegroup from Privateer Press as part of a project for a friend who wanted me to touch up his models to try and get them ready for filming battle reports. Here we are with the models we're going to be working on as part of this project. There are 4 in total. The first one is the Neref, a large flying warbeast that attacks with its tail and its head, biting and headbutting. The second one is the Nephilim Bolt Thrower. It's got melee and range attacks. It shoots with the crossbow and stabs with the blade that's on the bottom of the crossbow. It has pretty good range as well. And the final 2 are the Shredders. These guys are tiny warbeasts that like to gang up and get bonuses for attacking the same target as someone else. The first part is going to be removing the Neref from its base. After that we're going to come in with some medium grey. I'm using Mechanicus Standard Grey. As part of this we're also going to add in some accent colours, so just a random red, green and blue. These are going to get shaded mostly out, but you'll still see just a very hint of them in the background, which will help break up the standard rock. It's only small, so it doesn't matter too much, but I always try and add a few extra colours in when I'm doing rocks. Rocks can be really hard to replicate if you try and do just straight colours on their own, with a few washes. And when you do these highlight colours, it doesn't actually matter at all if the grey is still wet. Just go straight over it and make a mess of it. After we've let all that dry, we're going to come in with some Null Oil. This is going to be our dark wash for the first part. After this we're going to also come back in and do another dry brush, another shade, then another dry brush. So we can be pretty messy here and it won't matter too much. The first dry brush we're going to do is going to be Dawnstone. So this is just going to help add a quick layer of highlights before we come in with a dirt wash. I'm using Agrax Earthshade, but any dark brown wash will work for this step. It doesn't matter too much. The second wash is just to help try and blend things a little bit more before we go in with the final dry brushes. And again, it doesn't matter too much if we're a bit messy here. We're going to be covering up the actual base and the top of the rock, so going over a little bit won't matter. Right, and quickly back in with some Dawnstone. We're going to be a bit rough here, and then we're going to add in a more final highlight of a flesh tone. I used Kislev Flesh. This helps make it look a little bit more natural rather than just grey. Flesh tones are really good for the dry brush on rocks, and I try and use them instead of lighter greys. Next up is the texture paste. All I had here was the grey arena sand from Vallejo, so I've added some drops of yellow ink and some brown paint just to try and bring up the more desert sand look. You don't have to get spot on perfect here, you can adjust it with some shades and some dry brushing to get it closer to the final thing. I'm going to be adding some flocking later on, so this should be fine for now. You do want to make sure you get a decent coat of this. You're aiming for around 1 to 2 mils thick normally. If you do get it big thick, you can spread it around. You've got a lot of working time for it. You can even adjust it a little bit up to normally about half an hour later, I've found. If you do make any mistakes while you're working with the texture paste as well, just get an old brush, load it up with water and thin out the texture paste. It'll basically disappear most of the time, and any pigment that's left over can just be part of the basing effect. Once I've done that, I normally just run my finger around the base to clean up any excess paste. You can be more precise with this, use paper towel or whatever. I just run my finger around it because it's easier. For areas where you need the texture paste thinner, you can just use a wet brush to help get it onto the area a little more precisely than the spatula. After I've left that to dry overnight, then I can come in with some shades. The first shade that I've done here is Seraphim Sepia. It's a lighter tan shade. It's just a little bit better compared to something like, say, a null oil. It'll help give more of the desert effect. Like all of the shades so far, you don't have to be too clean with this. The base room itself will get fixed up later with some paint. If it gets on the rocks, it doesn't matter at all. And if the shade does start to pool a little in areas where you don't want it to pool, just try and soak some of it up with the brush. Some of the areas on the bases, we're going to use some Agrax Earth Shade. You can blend this in a little bit with the sepia wash, and it'll be fine. It'll just stop the transition being quite so noticeable. Next up is the static grass phase. So we're making a 50-50 mix of PVA and water here that we're going to spread out on top of the bases. I aim to try and leave about a third to half of the base without any glue. That way you can see the ground texture underneath. Coming in with a metal sieve, we're going to put in the first layer of static grass. This is a straw from Gale Force 9. We quickly clean off the edge of the bases and knock off any excess before we come in with the second layer of grass. This one I think is a spring static grass from Army Painter. I've selected a few types of tufts to use for this project. They are normally self-adhesive, but I've had them come off a lot of times, so I just super glue them on now. This one is the Wild Tuft Beige from Vallejo in 12mm. Before I can put the last tuft on the base, I glue the Neraf into position first, just so I can avoid damaging the tuft later. This one is Spiky Brown by Gamer's Grass. We're going to jump over to the shredders now, and we're going to go around the lips here with Screamer Pink from GW. It's about the best colour I could find to do the lips that would be different from the green and the red that was already on the model. While we've got the model here as well, we're also going to go through and touch up some of the green areas. There's some spots where you can see the white undercoat coming through, so we'll just touch that up with some Wag Flesh. Shane, who owns these models, he's a pretty new painter, but he's also got some troubles with his eyes, so sometimes he will miss details just because he simply cannot see them. And while some of this stuff could be skipped because it won't be visible once the model is based, because I'm doing this for someone else, I'm going to go through and try and pick out as many of those details as I can anyway. Onto the claws and the teeth of the shredders and the talons of the Neraf. We're going to hit this with some Morghast Bone as a base colour, and then we're going to build that up with a couple of shades. Just like the sand on the bases, the first shade we're going to do is Seraphim Sepia, and when this is done, we'll go in close to where the claws meet the hands and the feet, and put some Agrax Earth Shade in there just to darken that area a little bit more. For the Neraf, I didn't worry about repainting the teeth, I just left them as they were, and went over top with the shade, and then we went around to all of the talons and done the same shading that we'd done on the shredders. For the talons in particular, you want to really make sure that you don't have any of the wash pool. You will see later on that I did leave a spot, and it's very much darker than the rest of it. Highlighting the claws with Screaming Skull. Claws are one of the easiest things to highlight and one of the most noticeable things when you don't have them highlighted. So if you can spend a little bit more time on this, the model will look better in the end. And if you're feeling brave, you can try and do a quick highlight on the teeth as well, but it's definitely not required. For the talons on the Neraf, just try and use the side of the brush. That'll stop the highlights getting too thick or too thin. And like I said, you can see the spot there where I let the wash pool. I can fix that later. I've done the same thing with the claws on the feet and the hands of the Nephilim Bolt Thrower. And I'm also going to go in here with some Balthazar Gold to tidy up all of the bronze trimming that's on the armour. One of the only real changes I made on this model was on the right arm, where the bronzy copper colour was on the entire piece here. We're filling that in with some Runefang Silver, which is the silver used on the rest of the armour, just so it matches with how the rest of the armour's been done, including the left arm. Also cleaning up some spots where the bronze has spilled over onto the silver plating, just so it looks a little bit better on the end product. There's also a few other gubbins on the crossbow, like the trigger mechanism that weren't painted before. I've added a silver into them as well. For the bolt on the crossbow, I've given it a quick coating of tau light ochre just so it stands out a little bit more against the wood. And to help that stand out even more, we've gone through with the wood with Mornfang brown to darken that down so that it just sits a little bit better. If you wanted to, you could also add in a shade or a highlight here. I didn't worry too much about that. Where I did make sure I got a shade was on the spiralized patterns on the crossbow. They didn't really stand out very well on the starting model, so I've put in some Nuln Oil to try and accentuate that. The last step for this model is to just tidy up the blade on the front of the crossbow. We've used some Origami Gold to recoat that just to make it more solid. You could add in some shading and some highlights if you wanted, but I skipped that on this. The part of this project I was most looking forward to was actually the wings on the Niraf. So I'm coming in here where there's the recesses and adding in some Flesh Tearers Red as the shade. The Flesh Tearers Red is a really good shade for these. It adds richness without darkening it down too much. So I just loosely follow where all of the wrinkles are along the wings, as well as where the membranes join to the bone structure of the wing itself. And you can see here how noticeable it is now that the recesses are actually in the wings. Previously it was a little hard to see that there was actually a texture on the wings at all. To help sell that one step further, we're going to come in here with some Jacaro Orange. It's a nice pale orange. It's got a little bit of flesh tone in there, so it helps sell the organic feel of the wing. Similar to the shading, we're just going to come along where the wrinkles are to highlight, and then we're going to go around the outer edges of the wing as well. It does look a little bit bright on the camera here. In person it's a lot less of a stark contrast, and it blends in a lot more smoothly. Even just on the overhead camera you can see now there is a lot of detail in those wings that wasn't there before. I'm really happy with the look of the finished models. They are a little bit different from where they started, but you can still see that they fit the same army style. They won't be out of place next to his other models. Hopefully in the future I can actually get him around here and show him some of the techniques I've used to help him upgrade his skill set so that he's a little more confident doing the extra steps that I've done here with these models. It's been a really interesting project to work on. I don't normally work on helping other people fix their models or upgrade their models. Trying to stick to someone else's theme is a rather interesting challenge, and maybe I'll do it again in the future. And there we have it. Been a fun project to work on. Hope they'll be getting another painting video out next week or two. Until then, have a good one.